Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February Global Reads Webinar 2024. I'm Brenda Randolph, Outreach Director at the Center for African Studies at Howard University. And assisting in tonight's webinar are Vanessa Oyugi, who is our Co-Outreach Director, and Anya Ueno, our Communication and Media Manager. The Global Read webinar, as you may know, is sponsored by the World Area Book Awards, which includes 5 awards. The Children's Africana Book Award, CABA, which we have tonight. And then we have the Americas Award, which focuses on Latin America. The Freedom Book Award, which is East and Southeast Asia. The Middle East Book Award, obviously the Middle East. And SABA, the South Asia Book Award. Each year, the World Area Book Award sponsors 60-minute webinars that feature a presentation by an award-winning author with discussion on how to incorporate multicultural literature into the classroom. Now, the next webinar will be in April, and it will be sponsored by the Americas Award. With us tonight is Rima Onaseta, a Nigerian writer whose work explores identity and family dynamics. She holds a degree in finance from Northeastern University and an MBA from Suffolk University, and is currently pursuing an MFA. And I thought she was in Boston, but she is in wonderful, beautiful, sunny LA. The novel that she is discussing tonight is our 2023 CABA winner, How You Grow Wings. And Ruby Belgam, who reviewed the book, gave the novel 5 stars, highly recommending it for ages 14 and older, or grades 9 to 12, and also undergraduates in college. The book she writes strikes a realistic balance in depiction of different socioeconomic classes, demonstrating the enormous chasm between the very wealthy and other people, between rural and urban environments, between opportunity and desperation, between power and subservience. You can read Ruby Belgam's full review at africaaccessreview.org. Welcome, Rima.
Hello, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about How You Grow Wings, and I will start by sharing my screen so we can get started. Can we all see the screen?
Yes. Yes.
Great. Okay. So I'm here to talk about How You Grow Wings, my debut novel. It's a story about 2 sisters living in Nigeria and their journey to break free of their oppressive household and find their own paths. So these 2 sisters have very different journeys, and it's not just an exploration of sisterhood, it's also about a lot of things like power and power dynamics and community and what happens when your community fails you. Thank you, Brenda, for your introduction, but a little bit about me. I think Brenda covered most of it, but yes, I am a Nigerian writer. I'm currently pursuing my MFA in screenwriting from Boston University. Writing is something that I feel very passionate about, and I love the idea of exploring stories through different mediums. And that is why I'm both a writer and a screenwriter. And most of my stories focus on things that I wanted to read or watch when I was a young girl. I like stories about young Nigerian girls, young African girls who are chaotic, who are fierce, who question what they're taught. Young girls who don't necessarily follow the status quo and who make their own paths. And that is why my debut novel was about 2 sisters who go on very different journeys. So before I get started about How You Grow Wings, I want to talk about the importance of representation and why I wrote this book in the first place. So like I said, reading is something that I feel very passionate about. It's something that I knew I always wanted to do, but for some reason, it always seemed like something that I would do when I was older and wiser. I never really thought about writing a book until I don't know, I thought maybe my 50s, 60s. And it wasn't until it was just a week where I came across books by Tomi Adeyemi and Chibundu Onuzo and Yagyasi, and I realized that I don't have to wait until I'm older. I don't have to wait until, some magical time in the future. I can pursue what I want to do. I can write now. And it was seeing other young Black women writing books and doing what I wanted to do that gave me the courage to start writing this book. So it was seeing authors that look like me and seeing characters and pages that look like me that gave me the courage to start writing. So a little bit about my creative process. I think with this book, I really started with the whole write what you know. I wrote about what I knew. I wrote about what I've experienced. I wrote about what I've seen, what I've witnessed, what I've been told firsthand by family and friends and acquaintances. I really wrote about just growing up in Nigeria, seeing the different sides of what it is to grow up in Nigeria. And I just really wanted to write from my heart and write what I was familiar with. And the thing about writing what you know is that it's given me the courage, now that I know that I can write and I have written what I know, it's given me the courage to take it a step further and write what I don't know. And now my new books, it's all about exploring. It's all about doing a lot of research, putting my characters and putting my state of mind in a place that I'm not familiar with. It's all about stretching my creativity and my imagination to as far as I can stretch it. And a lot of it is about finding a process that works for me. While I was writing this book, I was living in Tempe, and a lot of times I would just go I didn't have a car, so I would take the bus to the Tempe Public Library, knowing that the next bus comes in an hour. And so having that hour to write really gave me the space and the time to start writing this book. And on the screen, you can see a picture. That's my niece painting or coloring in a picture. And I also get a lot of inspiration just from hanging around with my nieces and nephews, because just the creativity of kids is it's out of this world. It's so interesting, the places her mind goes to. And so a lot of times we'll just tell each other stories, and I just love listening to her sort of develop and explore the world and how her mind works. I find it so fascinating, and that sort of childlike wonder, I feel, is just such a great source of inspiration. And bookstores also, I love reading, and so I read a lot. A lot of times when I'm writing, I try to read in different genres from what I'm writing. I find that really sort of just puts my mind in all different kinds of spaces. That helps with the writing process. And by doing that, I can also put myself in my character's shoes, because I like to write from places that I'm unfamiliar with. A lot of my characters are going through things, different experiences that I myself might not have experienced, but thinking, if this character who has this personality is in this situation, what would they do? And that helps a lot with the writing process. And one last thing that I like to do is writing alternative endings. And I find that alternative endings is such an interesting way to see how readers view the book and also how they view characters. I've had a few readers come up to me saying that they need a sequel. They need to know what happens to the sisters at the end. And I've also had a few people tell me they don't like the ending and that they want to see, they wanted more. And what I find fascinating is that, well, how people feel about the ending is directly sort of correlated to how they feel about the characters. And so sometimes they love the characters and they want more. And sometimes they feel like they have such an interesting reaction to the characters, and, they feel like the character story isn't over and, the ending ended at an abrupt place. But for me personally, as the author, I feel like the ending was perfect. But it's always so interesting to hear from other people and how they view the ending. And I find writing alternative endings for books that I've read such an interesting way to sort of also put myself in the headspace of other authors' characters. So yeah, I think that's an interesting creative process, and that a lot of people should try if you want to be a writer, and just to see what you would do differently if you were the author. So setting. a lot of this book happens in 4 major cities. So Alihame is a small town in southeastern Nigeria. And it's also the town that my father grew up in. And I chose Alihame because it's a setting that I don't typically see in books. A lot of books that are set in Nigeria, typically in Lagos or Abuja, the capitals, the main places where a lot of people are. So I wanted to do something different. And I think a lot of the thing about setting is that it influences character and where you live and how you grow up influences how you navigate the world. Imagine being from a small town and moving to a city like New York, where it's just hustle and bustle and people are moving fast and talking fast. You sort of have to adjust, and it might take some time to adjust. And so I really wanted to put my characters in different settings and see how that also influences their decision-making and how they're viewing the world. And so they start off in Alihame, which is where they grew up in. And it's a place where it's a small town. In recent years, it's definitely been more developed, and they are in a place where everyone knows everyone. It's generations of people who have all grown up in the same environment and on the same street. And it's a tight-knit community, but also the thing about tight-knit communities is that they sort of protect themselves. And if people aren't willing to call out bad behavior, that sort of can create a toxic environment. And so even though there are very positive aspects of growing up in a small town and growing up where you all know each other, I also wanted to explore like the sort of negative aspects of that too. And the characters also go to Abuja. So Abuja is the capital, and in Abuja, they're exposed, Zam and Cheta are exposed to a completely different way of life. It's a bit slower. It's where they live in a neighborhood where the rich live. They are living in a place where they don't do any chores, and they're not, they have people cook for them, and they have staff who clean, and Zam is exposed to this whole new way of life that is so completely different from how she grew up in. And meanwhile, Cheta, her sister, moves to Benin City. Benin City is a very fast-paced city, not as fast-paced as Lagos, but way more than what she grew up in Alihame. And she's exposed to a completely new environment and it's a sort of city where it can eat you up whole. It can swallow you up whole if, you're not grounded. And so sort of having a character who's already in a sort of iffy state of mind, putting them in a situation where they don't know that many people, and the people they do know are sort of shady people. It gives them a lot of different people and places to interact with. And so that's why I also chose Benin City as one of the main settings of this. And the last one is London. So London is when Zam sort of ultimately escapes from her mother, and it's sort of a whole new start. And this is the place where she's able to explore a new side of herself and also a new side of life. She's able to go into the city and explore new things and see new places and meet new people. And I just wanted to show how these 4 very different cities influence and shape the girls' experiences. I mentioned community earlier. And so one of the popular phrases that we hear a lot is "it takes a village," which means it takes a village to shape you and help you and live, a healthy, good life. It takes a village to, but what I wanted to explore is, what does it mean when your village fails you? So these 2 sisters, Zam and Cheta, these 2 teenagers are growing up in a place where the people who are supposed to protect them are the ones harming them. Their mother is abusive. Their father doesn't speak and just allows the abuse to happen. And when all this is happening, no one in the village is sort of stepping up to protect them. And so I wanted to examine, what does home mean for each character? What does home mean? How do you find home when the home that you grow up in isn't a safe space? And I sort of examined this through putting them, like I said, in new settings, but also having characters who sort of create a new community for them. So with Zam, she gets to meet Ginika and Kyra, and even though they start off on the wrong foot, they end up being friends and creating a community, just these three girls who are end up raising themselves and sharing their vulnerabilities and becoming really good friends. And they sort of create a very supportive community for each other, and they become each other's person to lean on. While for Cheta, she sort of goes the other way, where she falls into a group of people and she ends up making really bad decisions because the community that she's in, it's all about survival. It's all about doing what is the best for you, even though that might not be the right decision. And so I wanted to examine what it means when the people who are supposed to care for you aren't there and you sort of have to make your own way in the world. Another thing I wanted to explore was language and belonging and what language means. So in Nigeria, there are over 500 languages spoken. And in one of the chapters, Zam says, the thing I miss most of all was the language. I love the way Ika flowed off my tongue, the way I didn't have to think twice about pronunciation or accent. So a lot of times, even though London became sort of this space where she could discover herself, she also ended up sort of feeling isolated in the sense that she's in a new space where they're speaking in a different accent and she sounds different. She doesn't necessarily feel at home. And even though home wasn't a safe space, I just wanted to show how complicated what home is and how complicated the feeling of belonging is. So even though she's escaped a place that has caused her harm, there's still this sense that she misses it. And there's still this sense that, she's not completely herself because she cannot communicate in the way that she feels most comfortable in. And why I really wanted to include Ika in this is because, again, it's one of the smaller Nigerian languages, which isn't as widely spoken. It's spoken in a very specific region. And the thing about it is that most languages are slowly dying out. And the thing about Ika is that even though a lot of people in the region speak it, a lot of people can't write it. And so writing this book, I had to call upon a lot of the older people I know who speak the language to ask them, how do you spell this word? How do you spell that word? And what I realized is that you can ask 5 different people the same question and get 5 different answers. So no one really knew how to spell certain things, and just how slowly the language is dying out. I felt it was very important to me to represent my mother tongue and that language. Also, Pidgin I put a lot of Pidgin in the book, and I did that because Pidgin is sort of a universal language in Nigeria, because even though you have 2 people who don't speak the same language, we still have that sort of communication. And I find Pidgin like such a beautiful language because of how it sort of picks from all the different communities, and it picks from English, and it picks from Igbo and Yoruba and Ika and Benin, and all these different communities all come together to form one, a melting pot of a language. And I find that so interesting and so fascinating. And so I really wanted to put languages that other people who aren't Nigerian might not be familiar with, and sort of explore my culture in that way. And I used the Ika dictionary, so that came in very handy. But yeah, I thought that it was really interesting, and it made me feel a bit more connected to my culture and my language in a way that I hadn't been. And I've had a reader reach out to me to say thank you for adding Ika in that, because she's never seen her language represented in a novel. And I thought I'm like, that's why I did it. So just having that one person reach out to me made, all the research and making sure I got the spelling of everything right, made it worth it. Another thing that is also very important in the book is food and culture, and how food experiences how we navigate the world. So a lot of times, especially in Nigerian culture, we express care through food. So you cannot go to someone's house and not be offered something to eat. Even in offices, there are a lot of times when I was working in Nigeria, you go into someone's office and they're like, oh, I'm eating, come join me, that kind of thing. A lot of times at work, we would all just gather around and eat from the same plate, because food is how you show care. Food is how you show, belonging. And it's a really important aspect of the book, because it's also how a lot of the family time is spent over dinner, over lunch. A lot of the things that happen over over food. And food is also a way to show hierarchy, certain things, the bigger pieces of chicken or meat, or the tastier pieces are given to elders. You serve the elders before you serve yourself. Food is also a way to have, show history and cultural identity. You eat a certain thing and you're like, oh yeah, the person who cooked this, came from this region, and that because there's just something about the food that just speaks to culture and speaks to heritage. There's also a scene where Cheta says, I couldn't pay rent, but at least I could buy her yogurt. And so even though that she couldn't afford to pay her friend rent, she showed her appreciation for being able to stay at her friend's place by buying yogurt and buying food and buying whatever she could to show her appreciation. So food is also heavily tied into cultural identity and history. And I really wanted to showcase the different types of food that we eat. A lot of times when I was writing this, I was like, oh, I'm getting hungry. And there's also a scene where Zam comes back from London and she is, eating up all the things that she couldn't eat while she was in London, and just having that moment of enjoying food and enjoying family just made her feel closer to home. Another theme that I explored in this book is colorism and skin bleaching. And so there is a epidemic of bleaching in Nigeria, where 77% of women use skin lightening products. And the thing about colorism is that it's detrimental to everyone in society, because many Nigerians believe that lighter skin is associated with better economic opportunities or greater chances of being elected to political office or improved dating prospects. And they believe that, it's lighter skin shows greater physical attractiveness. And this is detrimental to not just Zam in the book, who is light-skinned, but also Cheta and their relationship with their mother. Because in this book, the mother bleaches and it affects her relationship with her skin. There's also a scene where Zam wonders if she's the favorite because she's light-skinned. Cheta's sort of pride in her skin tone and pride in how she looks and how natural, her natural skin sort of irks her mother, because when I was writing that, I wanted to show that her confidence is something that her mother didn't understand. Her confidence in the way she looked and her pride in how her skin is naturally, and not feeling the need or the pressure from society to lighten it, is something that really her mother never understood. So it's a point of contention between mother and daughter. So yeah, that scene where Zam says, I knew Mama liked me more than Cheta, but sometimes I was not sure if it was because I was the child that never talked back, or if it was because I was light-skinned. Another scene from the beginning when Zam says, Cheta and I used to take turns rubbing the cream on her back, but Mama stopped asking Cheta to help. Mama stopped asking Cheta to help. The evening Cheta came into the room and started reading a newspaper article about the harmful effects of bleaching. Again, the mother couldn't understand or take, the comments in without feeling personally attacked, because she didn't understand how her daughter wasn't affected by all the colorism that was around them. And so I really wanted to explore the harmful effects of colorism and how it affects not just you on a personal level, but interpersonal relationships. Okay, so this, I think this is where it gets really interesting, the ethics and behavior and the decision that Cheta makes at the end. So at the center of this book is sisterhood and what the sisters mean to each other. And there's a moment where Zam says, if we had grown up in a different home, maybe Zam and I would have been kind of sisters that laughed and had inside jokes and told each other everything. And what I find so interesting about this is the fact that these two sisters are fundamentally different people. They do not understand each other. I like writing books and I love reading books about characters where there is no solution for their problem. And that's because they're such different people that they do not understand each other. They cannot understand how each other is making, certain decisions because they're just fundamentally different people. And I wanted to explore, why did the characters choose their paths? I believe that as an author, my job is not to judge the characters. My job is just to present them as they are. My job is to showcase the why, the reason why they do what they do, the reason why they make the decisions they make. And I believe that it's up to the readers to judge them and to cast their own decisions on what they think the characters are at the core of their being. So like I'm not interested in presenting characters that are good or bad. I'm more interested in examining the why. Why did they choose that path? And I want readers to understand why the characters chose those paths. And I think why I like stories or books like this is I find complicated characters so interesting. And a lot of times, what I find with complicated characters is that people like them in theory. So I've had a lot of people tell me that they're Team Cheta. And when I ask them why, and we sort of take the time to examine it, what I realize is that a lot of people they like her because they see a different side of her. They get to see her thoughts and her feelings, and they sort of get to understand why. But in reality, when you meet someone who's abrasive or who has a very forceful personality, you're not going to give them, a lot of times you're not going to give them the opportunity to sort of get to know them and figure out why they are the way they are. And so in reality, I feel like a lot of people would not like Cheta, but they love her in the book. And I just find that so interesting and and it just gives rise to so many interesting conversations about ethics and behavior and, judgment and how judgmental we are when we know people versus when we don't really know them. And I think one of the last things I wanted to talk about was trigger warnings. So this book does deal with heavy topics, and I feel that it is important to write books that deal with heavy topics because there are teenagers around the world who are living lives where home is not a safe space. And so a lot of times I think it's important to talk about coping strategies and to give students the space to feel what they're feeling. And sometimes that might be letting students excuse themselves from class or giving them an opportunity to have a few moments to collect themselves if, the topic or the conversation is veering towards something that's triggering for them. But I also, even though it is difficult to talk about, I do believe in writing things that are difficult because of the diversity of experiences. For people or for teenagers who are going through a tough time, reading a character who's going through something similar can make them feel less alone. It can make them feel seen, can make them feel understood. But for students who haven't experienced that, it can also foster understanding and empathy. It can give you an opportunity or the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I think it's important that if it is difficult for a student to get through a certain chapter or a certain section of the book, to avoid putting them on the spot and giving them the opportunity to leave the room. But yes, I do believe that it is important to write and to read difficult books because a lot of people are living difficult lives. And that sense of understanding and fostering that empathy is really good for everyone, really. But yes, I think it's important for students and for teenagers everywhere to sort of see their reality reflected and to see that, there are ways out of it and that there is hope. I think it gives hope and I think it gives a sense of understanding. And I think it's important when dealing with difficult topics to act, to talk, and to read, and to think with care, and to be very cautious about the words you use and the things you say. Thank you. So that's my presentation about how you grow wings, and I hope that helped. I hope that answered some questions that you might have. And if you have any other questions, I'm open to answering them.
Thank you so much, Rima. Thank you for sharing your book and sharing this presentation with us. And we have quite a bit of time for a Q&A. So for everybody, you can unmute yourself. You can, when you'd like to ask a question, and you can also share your video now that Rima's presentation is over. We can get more intimate, and you can share your questions out loud or put them into the chat, however you like.
Thank you, Rima. Dr. Helen Bond, I'm sorry, I haven't made it quite home yet, so I'm not able to show my picture. But I wanted to say I really enjoyed your presentation, and especially your section on colorism. How might something like this be included in the classroom discussions around color and stigma?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
I said, how might such a discussion around colorism and stigma and race, you know, be, how might a teacher approach that in the classroom through your book?
So I think through my book, I think a way to approach that is to sort of read the chapters in the beginning where colorism is talked about. I think it's an important scene because there's a moment where Cheta sort of confronts her mother about the colorism and the way the mother responds. And I think it's important to analyze not just the stats, the fact that 77% of Nigerians, I don't know the stats for the rest of Africa, the rest of the world. I just know about Nigeria specifically, but the fact that that 77%, but why does that happen? And what are not just the numbers, but the reasoning behind it, the feeling behind it, the people behind it, and why they feel that that is the way forward, and how the history, and I think it's very important to talk about the history of how colonization in that specific region, and how sort of lightness and the idea that being lighter skinned leads to more opportunities, why that is prevalent. And so talking about the root cause, I think, is very important. It's a very important way to sort of inject that into classroom discussions, and also talking about sort of the people behind it and sort of individual reasonings behind it. There are a lot of documentaries that sort of explore that in a more in-depth and in-depth way that can be used in a classroom.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
Here's a question. Which character was the hardest to write?
Oh, definitely. I think Zam. I think Zam was the hardest to write because with Cheta, her anger at the world and at her family and at her situation was just so visceral and so in your face that it was easy to sort of capture that emotion and write that. But with Zam, a lot of what she feels is sort of buried underneath this veneer of I'm okay and everything is perfect. And so sort of like digging into that and figuring out who is the character beneath this facade of, oh, I'm okay. And so I think Zam was the hardest to write.
There's a question from Pat Austin. Have you shared your book with teens? And if so, what was their response?
So I have, and I've gotten a few different responses. I found that with teens, they tend to take sides with the characters, and almost all of them are all team Cheta. I think they respond to Cheta in a very, and I think it's because Cheta sort of wears her heart on her sleeve, and with her, there's no guessing games. You know where you stand, and I think kids or teenagers respond to that in a person, in knowing exactly where you stand with the person. So I think they respond to that, and so they sort of prefer Cheta. I think they respond to her in a very interesting way.
Here's another question. as we were talking, you were talking about how it takes a village, to raise a child, and that's how we all think about communities in Africa and other places. But I wondered if Nigeria was experiencing the kind of loss of community that the U.S. is. I mean, I grew up on a street where everybody tended everybody's business. I couldn't do anything that then if I tried to, the neighbors would tell my mother, or we knew what was happening, in some of the households. But is this a difference in time? And in the past, did neighbors intervene when they saw problems in other households, or is that just not a question of time passing and changes in communities?
So I think in terms of community in Nigeria, growing up, I lived in a neighborhood where we're never at home. No one was ever in their homes. We're always just sort of on the streets, just playing with each other. And so there was this sort of sense of community where wherever the kids were, it's sort of automatic that the parents who are around who sort of look out for you. And so there was that sense of community. And like speaking to my mother about where she grew up and that sense of community, it was all very people looking out for each other. But I think it is sort of definitely community is degrading a lot now, and that's because a lot of people are leaving the country. So for example, I got married last year, and all my friends, like my bridesmaids and friends, all flew in from different places because everyone is looking for new opportunities. So a lot of people are leaving the country. We're having a shortage of doctors, we have a shortage of nurses because people are looking for better opportunities, so they're leaving the country. And so that's sort of degrading community because now no one is around anymore. A lot of times when people are having meetups with friends, it's through Zoom because everyone is in different countries all over the world because everyone is looking for a better opportunity for themselves and for their family. And so I think a lot of community is sort of getting lost that way because people aren't growing or aren't with the people they grew up with anymore. Everyone is just so spread out. It's harder to have hangouts. It's harder to connect in person with people.
Elsa, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm on the phone. So first of all, thank you so much. It's as a non-writer and as somebody who has never written fiction, I'm in great admiration of you sharing about your process, and it's always so encouraging to hear that it's time to write now, and how you were inspired by other wonderful African female writers. So congratulations. My question is about a character of the mother and sort of what your reasons were to choose the mother as the crux of difficulty and the crux of harshness, and that relationship of abuse really that you depict in such sort of textured way as a mother. Hard to read. I'm just curious about your kind of choice of that and maybe where it comes from and how you kind of analyze that choice for your audience.
Yeah, so I think I chose the mother as sort of the main antagonist.
I might have lost the group.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. So I think I chose the mother as sort of the main antagonist because I wanted to sort of explore the idea that motherhood is all about softness and nurturing. I wanted to explore a mother who has her own personal struggles and who takes it out on her kids. I want to explore a mother who is everything a mother that we envision isn't supposed to be. So she's sort of the anti-mother in a way. And I wanted to explore that because I just thought it was really interesting where you expect motherhood to be about, nurturing, but you see this woman who's doing the exact opposite, who's instead harming her kids. And I also, especially in Nigeria, where it's very patriarchal, I wanted to create a home where sort of the husband, the mother is actually the head of the family, and the husband is sort of like a by the way character who doesn't really, do anything, and how that sort of affects the kids. I just find I really like writing about complicated women, because even Aunt Sophie, she is not a good mother in many ways. And I wanted to explore that, how her own personal trauma with how her mother died sort of affects the way she parents her daughter. And so I just really, really wanted to explore different mother-daughter relationships and sort of how a negative mother-daughter relationship has an effect on how the daughter sees herself and how she grows up. I just thought it was just an interesting aspect to explore.
That was kind of a question that I had, with Kira's mother being wealthy, the wealthy, beautiful Aunt Sophie, and Zam's mother, who was like neither wealthy nor beautiful. But despite their obvious differences, the question, you've kind of answered it. Are they similar in any way? um,
Yeah, I think they are similar. They are very different, but also very similar in the sense that they let their past trauma affect their relationship with their kids. And so a lot of what I wanted to explore was sort of generational trauma, and how when you don't deal with your problems, you can take it out on the next generation and have a negative impact on the next generation.
Faces Magazine had an article on Nollywood, and many of the people here are teachers, so they know about Faces Magazine. They had Bollywood and Nollywood. One of the things they were talking about classic Nigerian storylines, and they were saying that you see these in the Nollywood movies. Are there any classic Nigerian storylines in your novel?
I think they definitely are. Now, what are they? I think, so I sort of subvert it with the dad not being sort of the head of the household. But I think one of the classic storylines is a kid from a poor family moving and finding themselves in a situation where they're now with a rich family. I feel like that's something that you see in classic Nollywood movies, sort of exploring that. What else? I think definitely sisters who don't get along. That is also very classic Nollywood. You see that a lot in movies about, sisters who don't get along. And I'm just really interested about books with sisters, because I grew up with 3 brothers. And so I'm like, I just want to write about sisters, because I guess that's an example of writing what I don't know, because I don't know what it's like to have a sister. But yeah, I think that's one of the classic Nollywood tropes.
You had mentioned earlier, I think before everyone joined, that you had to take out, quite a few either chapters or situations. Is there one chapter or part of the book that you kind of mourned taking out? And then also, how many drafts did you write until you and your agent were satisfied?
I think it was about 4 drafts, but the biggest change was the very first draft of this was Cheta was not in it. It wasn't her point of view. So it was Zam and Auntie Sophie. And so when I submitted it to my agent before she signed me, we had a conversation, and I knew that there was something off about the book, but I thought as I was writing it, because again, I didn't write with an outline. I just wrote as the chapters came to me. So I didn't even write the chapters in order. I just wrote whatever, idea came to me that day. And by the time I finished the book, it was so disjointed. And I just realized that I wrote an entire book from Auntie Sophie's point of view, but I think I should have written it from Cheta's point of view. But at that point, I didn't want to start rewriting the book. So I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to go out on submission and hope for the best. And so when I had my first conversation with my agent, she said, I think there's something that's slightly off about this. And I was like, yeah, I feel the same way. I think I should have written it from Cheta's point of view. And she was like, yes, that is what's wrong with it. You need to write it from Cheta's point of view. And so I had to delete about 40,000 words. So yeah, 40,000 words, and completely scrapped Auntie Sophie's point of view and wrote from Cheta's point of view. But I think the book is better off being about the two sisters and focusing on the two sisters. But I do miss some of the Aunt Sophie chapters because I feel like you would have gotten to know her a little bit more and sort of understand her a little bit more.
Yeah, that raises an interesting point because I wonder why Aunt Sophie just didn't take both girls. Of course, we wouldn't have had as interesting a story if she had, but yeah, Cheta really needed help.
Yeah. Yeah, she did.
But yeah, if we had maybe that's the next story is Aunt Sophie's story in another.
I was about to say that. Somebody said it in the chat too.
Maybe, you never know.
I would love a lost chapter from Aunt Sophie's. I can't even imagine the whole book from Aunt Sophie's perspective now.
Yeah, a lot of it followed her from when she was younger. So you sort of see her in her 20s. And so, yeah, I think sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish readers got to see that side of her and got to like explore her, but maybe one day.
How would we have felt about the sisters through Aunt Sophie's perspective?
Sorry?
How would we had the audience or the readers, do you think how would they have learned about the sisters differently if it was
So yeah, I
published in
think
that way?
that it's a slightly different story because it's not from Aunt Sophie's perspective. So they wouldn't have gotten as much of the sisterhood sort of storyline because it would have been more one-sided because it would have only gotten it from Zam. So it did sort of change the substance of the book a lot, taking her out and putting in Cheta.
I'm blanking right now on the name of the other young woman who comes to live or stay at us. I loved her. Can you talk a little bit about her?
So Ginika is extremely curious. She is sort of the Gen Z that a lot of the older Nigerians are afraid of because she is so curious and she wants to know why. You can't just tell her what, something is. She's like, why is it like that? You know how you have like those toddlers who are just learning about things and they ask why? Like that's Ginika in a nutshell. And so I just really enjoyed writing her because her curiosity and the fact that like it's so interesting because I think Ginika is who Cheta might have been if she grew up in a more nurturing family.
Mm-hmm. And she, of course, brings all that dynamic about colonialism and because she's a little bit more sophisticated, I think, or educated about the situation maybe than Zam. And yeah. So Ika was a new language for me, hearing about it. Is it related to Igbo?
So yes, it's very closely related, very similar in some ways. A lot of people who speak Ika also speak Igbo and understand the language, and you can sort of pick it up if you speak either language. It's very similar.
We have a question from author and fellow CABA winner Elizabeth Irene Baitier. And she wrote in the chat that she's enjoying this interview immensely and look forward to reading this book. And she wonders if you had any personal experiences or anecdotes that inspired certain scenes or characters.
I think one of the things that inspired this one of the sort of colorism scene was, so my mom has 4 brothers and 4 sisters, and she's the darkest in her family. And my grandmother is really light-skinned. So growing up, my mom would be asked a lot, are you sure you're Alice's daughter? Are you, are you sure that's your sister? Because how are they all light skinned and you look like that? So that kind of thing happened to her a lot growing up. But my mom is the kind of person who was just born with confidence. And so it never sort of affected her. She's like, yeah, that's my mom. Yeah, that's my sister. No, I'm not adopted. I'm, we're siblings and that's fine. And so I just wanted to explore, like, if she didn't have that confidence, having people sort of question your heritage or question your family links and question, like, are you sure, you're your mother's daughter, like how that affects, you. So that's sort of what I wanted, that sort of, I sort of thought about that as I was writing those scenes.
Thank you for that. We also have a comment from Karen Brown. She says, wonderful presentation. I often hear, write what you know, but I'm interested to hear, write what you don't know. Please elaborate. She says, I feel you are giving a gift of freedom to all with this guidance. She loves it. She can imagine that students, especially shy students who can find their voice through writing, will blossom hearing this advice.
Oh, thank you. I was a really shy kid growing up, and so I feel like reading was an escape. It sort of put me in places that I would probably never get to visit and experiences that I will never get to have. And so I felt like reading was just such a way to immerse myself in the world. When you're reading, you sort of kind of can become the character, and I just really think that's really interesting. And so when I say write what you don't know, I feel it's about writing things that scare you, things you might not understand, things that, so currently one of the books that I'm working on right now is Benin City in the 18th century. I know nothing about what life was like then, but I'm doing so much research, and in the process, I'm learning so much about my own culture that I didn't know, and even things that, like, I would have to ask my grandma about and she doesn't know. And so a lot of sort of culture has been lost in the process. And so it's sort of, I feel like I'm learning a lot of things that I should have known, or I would have known, if a lot of our culture wasn't sort of stolen and haven't been lost to time. And so just writing that has also connected me to my culture. So writing what I don't know or what I'm not familiar with, I just find that it's just an interesting way to stretch your, the limits of your imagination. I'm also adding a little bit of magical realism there. And so it's just fun to just play around with structure and story and plot and just imagine different scenarios.
Is there another question in the chat, Vanessa? I did want to mention, Ikiwa Irie is one of our Kava winners, and she has done these books about Benin City. So maybe there's a conversation for you.
Yeah, that would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, she's got a lot of her materials that she puts online. So she wrote about the Queen Mother, yeah. And reimagining her as the Yoba, reimagining her life as a child. So yeah, we found that quite an interesting and unique book.
I did overlook a question from earlier that was asking if you have done any classroom presentations so far, and if so, what kind of reactions you have gotten from teachers and students, and if you haven't yet, what would you imagine teachers could pull from this in the classrooms?
So I have done classroom presentations. I think the first was with first graders, and so it was a very yeah, they were more interested in the screenwriting aspect of my career. And so, yeah, we talked a lot about movies. I spoke to a bunch of third graders, and they were actually so curious about so many things. And I find that they are also interested in sort of the sisterhood aspect of it. I think they find that fascinating, about like sort of siblings who don't get along, because I think it's like sort of they're at that age where they are sort of trying to discover who they are, and they're sort of having their own mind and having their own opinions. So I found the third graders to be very engaging. Also spoke to high schoolers, I think 11th grade, and silence. I think they were too cool for school. Didn't really get any engagement there, but I think some people were interested, but they were just, you know, a little bit too cool for me. But yeah, I found that the third graders, they asked so many interesting questions.
Well, tagging on to that question real quick, Karen is also says she's intrigued about your screenwriting life. And is it any different telling stories, or what is the difference to you telling stories on screen versus in writing?
Oh, it's really different. And sometimes when I'm writing scripts and then I want to go back and write a book, it takes some time to get myself in the right headspace to write a book. Because when you're writing a book, you're the architect, you're the painter, you're the electrician, you do everything. You sort of build the entire book from scratch. And so you sort of have to delve into the character's mind, and you know, but when you're writing a screenplay, it's so different, because there are a lot of things that I don't, especially with setting, you have to just be brief, but also be sort of colorful with how brief you are. And so I don't have to spend as much time setting things up, because I'm thinking, you know what, that's up to the set designer. You know what, this is a decision for the camera crew or for the lighting crew. This is a decision for the director. So screenwriting is more collaborative because there's so many people who have to bring it to life. And so and you also have less space. So as a screenwriter, you have to be very economic with your words, and you have to be very precise. But when you're writing books, I feel like there's more space to play with the characters, and because you're sort of building this entire world by yourself, it's more there's a bit more freedom than with screenwriting, because with screenwriting, again, a lot of the decisions, it's like, you can't write that because that is not the writer's decision to make. You know, the director makes that decision, or the lighting person will make that decision, the set designer will make that decision. So you have to be as, you know, tight as you can.
How would you feel about
question.
How would you feel about this book put on screen? Would you be okay with all the decisions made?
I would love it. I would love to see it on screen, but again, I think when you're a screenwriter, you have to sort of be okay with certain things being out of your hands, and having, you know, the director sort of translate it in their own vision, in their own way. So there's you give up a lot of control, and you have to sort of be at peace with that. And so I guess there's certain things that I might not be okay with, but I don't know. It depends on what happens.
Well, I want to say a big thank you to you, Rima, for this wonderful discussion, and giving us a little bit more depth about the book and about your writing. It's just been so wonderful to have you with us tonight. But before we leave, I have promised everybody that you will see the new winners for the 2024 Book Awards. Before I show you the books, I do want to tell you that Elizabeth Irene Beatty is one of our winners again. She won before and she's won again. So can you unmute yourself, Elizabeth Irene?
Hi.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You.
I am very excited about this.
You want to tell just a little bit about the two books?
The two, okay, yeah. So I have it's Flying Up the Mountain is this year's one of the honor books this year, and it's actually a sequel to Crossing the Stream. And I'm happy to say Crossing the Stream is there's three versions of it. This is the US version, that's the UK version, and this is the Ghanaian version. And these books were largely inspired by my grandmother. I've always said that my grandmother, I just had one grandparent. Everybody else growing up around me had four, but the one grandparent I had was like four rolled into one. And it's really explores how when love and strength are poured into you, the difference that it can make. So my main character is 12-year-old Atto, and in Flying Up the Mountain, he's on finally won the chance to go to a bird island, which his father had helped to develop, and it's paradise. Until they find out that it's not actually paradise. So how Atto and his 3 friends struggle to make sure that this island stays beautiful is the gist of the story, and the support that he has from a woman who loves him very much, being his grandmother, is something that readers will discover in Flying Up the Mountain. So thank you very much. Really grateful and happy to be here.
And I don't know if she's still with us because I think she was on her phone, but Elsevier is one of our CABA committee members. Yeah, and we want to thank her for her hard work, and Vanessa and Tavi, who is also an outreach person. So now I'm going to share my screen and show you the new winners, and that's how we'll leave this evening. Thank you very much for coming. That's not quite it. Let's see here. Best book, Egyptian Lullaby. And here we have 3 honor books: The Taste of Home, Sankofa, A Culinary Story of Resilience and Belonging, Flip Floppy. And our best chapter books, Near My Freedom, The Interesting Life of Equiano, Aludo Equiano by himself, All That It Ever Meant, which is set in Zimbabwe. And here we have Flying Up the Mountain by Elizabeth Irene Beatty. So please visit the CABA page. And if you want to learn a little bit about the stories, you can go to Africa Access Review. All of them have not been reviewed yet, but you can learn a little bit about the genre and the author, illustrator of the books. Again, thank you very much for being with us tonight. And remember to come back in April for the Americas Award presentation. Good night.
Good night. Thank
Good
you,
night.
Rima.